Hello. Today I'd like to talk to you about the metric system. Now, as far back as recorded history, people have been measuring things, okay? And that should come as no surprise to anyone, right? People need to know how much of something there is. And all over the world, people are developing these unique local folk measurement systems, okay? So, for example, in Rome, they had the mile, how many steps it took for Roman soldiers, or 1,000 steps of the Roman soldier was 1 mile, right? You have the foot, all right? That's a very common measurement in many places. You have the cubit, right? That's sort of the length from your elbow to your middle of your middle finger, or end of your middle finger, like your forearm. And then you have the fathom, right? The length of your... Oh, yeah, I gotta use the mic. The length of your outstretched arms, right? Around 6 feet. So people are using these kind of intuitive, body-based measurements, also based on things that maybe people have available to them, right? So in ancient Sumer, there was the shekel. The shekel is derived by the weight of 180 barley grains, right? So this makes sense in like a merchant or trading context, right? Where people are in the marketplace, maybe trading grain for oil or something like this, right? So you have these very intuitive units of measure. Now, nowadays, most people use the metric system. Most countries do. Notable exceptions would be Britain and the US. And there's historical reasons for that I'll get into. But the reason why... Well, I want to explain a little bit why I don't like the metric system in a moment. But first, I want to talk about the rise of the metric system. And in order to understand it, we kind of have to understand the French Revolution. So the French Revolution had many causes. So first of all, let's understand the political landscape of France pre-revolution. You have kind of three estate system. So you have the nobles, which are the first estate, I think, and the second estate is the nobility, or the clergy. Sorry, nobility is the first estate, clergy is the second estate. And the third estate, comprising 97% of the population, is the commoners. And most of the time, when there's heavy taxes or perhaps food shortages, the third estate can be appeased very easily, and this system is kind of very stable. Although maybe not so fair to the third estate, to the commoners. But either way, this happens again, right? There's heavy taxes. The commoners don't want anything to do with it. They want tax breaks. They want to be left alone, basically. They think the church is corrupt. They think the nobility is, kind of overreaching. And so, excuse me. And so they ask the parliaments, the financial courts, to lower the tax rate. And because the nobles, which comprise the parliaments, are kind of benefiting from these taxes, they're like, well, no, we're not going to do that because we don't have the authority. If you want to lower the taxes, you have to call this the Estates General. Now, the Estates General is a assembly of the three estates. You have representatives from each caste. And the problem is that normally the commoners are voted down because it's not proportional representation. You get 1 vote per caste, right? So the nobles and the clergy will vote down the commoners 2-1, and nothing really ever changes. Now, the problem is that this time, around the French Revolution, like 1789, when the Estates General is called, there's these different ideas, philosophical ideas floating around that haven't been around before. And so, sorry, my hand's getting tired. And so you have these philosophers like Montesquieu, like Voltaire, like John Locke, who are kind of spreading these ideas of individual liberty, of like a constitutional government, of freedoms, of individual rights. And so this Estates General is different because the commoners are not going to be so easily appeased. Instead, they're kind of fed up with being shut down. They voted down 2-1. And so they decide, hey, we are going to secede. And in June 17th, something like that, 1789, they do. And the commoners declare themselves the National Assembly, okay? And they claim equal authority to the king. And so at this point, you have the beginning of the French Revolution, kind of spurred on by these ideas of rationality, logic, science, equality. And so they don't just stop there, though, because, I mean, there is some things that are fair, right? Like the church is a little bit corrupt. They're charging indulgences, high taxes, not really a lot of accountability. Perhaps the nobles are overspending. Marie Antoinette was kind of well known for her lavish spending. So there are legitimate concerns. But the revolutionaries don't just stop at fixing these things. No, they kind of go overboard, and nothing's off the table. So instead of just renouncing feudal ties and doing all these other things, one of the things they seek to change throughout the French Revolution is the metric system, the folk measurements. Because at this point, just like everywhere else in the world, there are really inconsistent units. People are using all sorts of different ways to measure things. There's no standardization. And so I think it's 6 years after the revolution, so it'd be 1795. The National Assembly, which is still in power at this point, they asked the French Academy of Sciences to come up with a system of measurement that will unify the French people under one system. And they want this system to be universal. So instead of designing the new system based off of parts of the body or things that are readily available like barley, they decide to design it based on the size of the Earth. So they defined the meter as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator running through Paris. And so you have a bunch of scientists that go out, they measure all these things, they create a triangulation mesh to measure the Earth's circumference. And of course, they kind of do it a little bit wrong. So the original definition of a meter is not exactly 1/10,000,000th. It's a little bit off. I think it's like 0.2 of a millimeter. But they kind of largely succeed in doing this. And they present the measurement system. And I believe, I'm not sure exactly when it is. Maybe it is in 1795. The Royal Academy of Sciences presents the National Assembly with the metric system in its early stages. And lost my glasses. And some of the original measurements from this 1795 system were the meter, the R, the steer. We don't really use those two anymore. And then the liter and the gram. So kind of really laying the foundation for the modern metric system. Rabbit. I should probably turn around. Anyways, pretty soon, the French revolutionary governments were very unstable. So very quickly, one government is dissolved and another one takes over. We go through like 5 or 6 different governments. But eventually Napoleon comes on the scene, starts kind of consolidating power under his own regime. And Napoleon's not really so interested in the revolutionary ideas, but he's not really a conservative or a royalist either. He's kind of just more interested in consolidating power under himself, right? He kind of fancies himself like a new Caesar. So he just wants to kind of rule over a vast amount of territory. In order to do that, he has to stabilize the French people and kind of unify them. And so what he does is he creates the customary measures, in French, mesure usuelle. I don't know, you feel free to mock my pronunciation there. But basically it's a combination of the metric system and the older imperial style folk units. And so he allows people to continue using folk units, which were outlawed under the National Assembly, but he redefines the folk units in terms of the metric system. So for example, 1 foot is 333 millimeters. Now, Napoleon is very territorially expansionistic, right? He wants to take over Europe. He really wants to cross the English Channel into Britain, but he never ends up doing that, which is part of the reason why Britain still uses imperial units. But a lot of the other European countries, they're also like France. They're primed for a revolution. They're primed with these Enlightenment ideas. So they're ready to accept the metric system. But when the Napoleonic Wars are happening and the French armies are kind of occupying these other territories in Europe, they're spreading the metric system with them. And so all these more liberal-minded nobles, the scientists, and some of the revolutionary sympathizers in these other European countries are really ready to accept the metric system. And so it kind of spreads over Europe like this. Now, of course, the US was never conquered by Napoleon. I'm not really sure if it was ever on his radar, but Britain certainly was on his radar, and he never managed to cross the English Channel. He didn't really have the genius to understand naval battles. He really understood only the land-based battles. Now, and I guess that's sort of where the story ends, where the metric system has spread over Europe, not to the US, not to Britain, but everywhere else. Now, I live in Canada, and in Canada there was a law passed called the Weights and Measures Act, kind of based off of the British system, that was trying to enforce metrication, or the metric system, over Canada. Now, in 1985 it was overruled, and imperial units are still allowed to be used legally. But Canadians kind of are famously on the fence, right? We measure like weight in pounds, but distance in kilometers. We measure temperature in Celsius. But if you're in the country, it's a mile, not a kilometer. It's really weird. Anyway, my question is, like, should Canadians seek to finish the process of metrication? Is the metric system a good thing? Now, there are arguments for the metric system, right? The first being that it's universal, right? So it's not based on some weird thing like the foot or the forearm, but rather it's based on something that everyone can get on board with, right? The size of the world, right? It's very logical. And another way it's logical is that once you have the meter, other units of measurement are defined based on the meter, right? So a liter would be a cubic box of 10 centimeters on each side. And then a kilogram is defined as 1 liter of cold water, right? So it's very logical. The second reason people might use the metric system is because it's decimal based. So it's very easy to kind of move the decimal place to do math. And then you have something called multiplicative prefixes, right? So 10 meters is a decameter. 1,000 meters is a kilometer, right? So it's kind of very logical. And then the third reason to use the metric system is that it's everyone else is using it, right? Why not just use it? Now, there are also arguments against the metric system, right? So an argument for kind of folk measurements or imperial measurements would be, one, they're very intuitive, okay? So if you say, like, oh, I'm going to the bar to drink a pint, like, I know what you mean. If you say, I go to the bar to drink 473 mils of beer, like, that makes no sense. No one says that, right? So imperial and folk units are kind of true to life. They're organic. They fit our everyday use. The second reason is that they're much more able to be divided than decimal-based systems. So instead of base 10, like the metric system, imperial units are like base 12 or 16 or 24, right? So if you think of the factors of 10, there's 2 and 5. That's it. But the factors of 12, you have 2, 6, but also 3 and 4. So you can divide it into thirds very easily, into fourths very easily, without getting fractions. And then the third reason against the metric system would be, intuitive, divisible. Yes, they're culturally significant. So in somewhere, I think it's in like Indonesia, they were asking villagers, like, oh, how far is it to the next village? And the villagers would respond, oh, it's 3 rice cookings, right? Because everyone knows how long it takes to cook rice, and everyone knows how long it takes, like, the average pace. So 3 rice cookings. Oh, my keys are attached to the tree. Now, if you think that different cultures are worth preserving, like I do, then you wouldn't really want people to metricate, to convert to the metric system, because then they kind of erase part of their culture. Now, oh, I lost my keys again. So, those are kind of the arguments for and against the metric system, and you can kind of decide what you like on that. But I actually want to go a bit further. My anti-metric sentiment extends beyond the arguments already presented. I think I don't really want to ally myself with the ideas and the history that the metric system was conceived under. Because what you probably know about the French Revolution is kind of the standard story that's presented in high school, right? You have the church oppressing these people, and then you have these like scientific rational liberators that come in. They give everyone rights and independence and all these things, right? That's really not true. That's really largely a fabrication. The French Revolution was extremely unstable, violent, bloody, and it was far from having popular support from the people. I think 30,000 priests were forced to evacuate. 30,000 churches were destroyed. We have 8,000 priests being forced to marry against their religious beliefs. You have 40,000 people dying during the Reign of Terror alone, from beheadings and whatnot. Many of them totally innocent. Their only crime is opposing the revolution, right? Or harboring anti-revolution sentiment. And then you also have, during the Revolutionary Wars, you have like over 500,000 people dying from that as well. And all of this is being done under the banner of reason and progress. And yeah, I just don't really feel comfortable like allying myself with that. But yeah, maybe that's lesser of it. Anyways, it's part of it for sure. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the metric system, it's very useful in the laboratory, but it's not suited to everyday life. So yeah, thanks for listening to me rant, and check out this cool beaver dam. Anyways, see you later.